So I'm now going to move us into a deep state of depression. Listen very carefully to this statement and tell me whether it's true or false. People invariably resist change. Does anybody say false?
I would say false.
You got it correct. The operative word is resist, isn't it? But what is the modifier of that? Invariably. What does that word mean? Always. Do people always resist change? No. Maybe a lot of the time, but not always. In fact, there's certain changes that occur in our lives that we welcome. I don't know how you felt about your first marriage, but...
At the beginning or the end?
But some of us welcome that kind of change, right? And I have found people in organizations that will say when the top management says we're going to do something differently, I've heard people say, well, it's about time. So it's not always resisted. So let's be clear about that. How many people do that? Not many, fortunately. A second form of resistance is what we call ideological. Ideological. Is it possible for two intellectually honest people to disagree? Of course. You see it one way, I see it another. So, but it's honest disagreement. We just don't see the world quite the same way, or we have a different perspective. We call that ideological differences. We have different beliefs about it, or different values that we hold. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, you have to make the assumption if it's in that category, the person is a reasonable human being. Sometimes that assumption is accurate and sometimes it's not, but let's assume. So what you have not done sufficiently with that person is your homework. So you need to go back and gather more data to document your case and to come back at the person again, but with much more evidence, much more persuasive information than you had before. And if that person, again, is intellectually honest with you, then it's possible that that person can be persuaded, or at least move from resistance to ambivalence. But resistance is real. It is very real. So let's talk just a few minutes about the nature of resistance and what it really means. First of all, we have to make sure that we are clear about the difference between resistance and ambivalence. Sometimes we see people being ambivalent about what it is we're trying to do, and it's not necessarily resistant. It is, I just don't know. I'm not sure. It makes me feel uncomfortable, but tell me more, maybe implicitly that is being said. So the first step in your diagnostic trip when you're trying to bring about change and you encounter something that you think is resistance, is it really? Or is the person just on the fence and wanting more information? I've made that mistake myself. There's a reason why it sticks with me. When I was trying to bring about change here, in the program here, and I thought one of my faculty members was really resisting me, and I got obstinate. But really what she was doing was wanting more information. And speaking of resistance in organizations, what is the most resistant to change organization in the world? Besides the Catholic Church. It's probably a university. Now the other thing about resistance, let's just talk about different types of resistance. Let's say that we have identified that it's probably resistance, it's not ambivalence. This person is really against this whole thing. What's the nature of that resistance? Well, there's at least 3 different types. And if we don't get that right in terms of trying to understand what type it is, we're not going to know how to deal with it. Now, one type is what we call blind, B-L-I-N-D. There are some people, not many, but there are some people, when you mention the word change, they say, oh no, not here. No. So they just automatically, knee-jerk reaction is to resist. How many people do that? Not many, fortunately, maybe less than 10%. A second form of resistance is what we call ideological. Ideological. Is it possible for 2 intellectually honest people to disagree? Of course. You see it one way, I see it another. So, but it's honest disagreement. We just don't see the world quite the same way, or we have a different perspective. We call that ideological differences. We have different beliefs about it, or different values that we hold. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, you have to make the assumption if it's in that category, the person is a reasonable human being. Sometimes that assumption is accurate and sometimes it's not, but let's assume. So what you have not done sufficiently with that person is your homework. So you need to go back and gather more data to document your case and to come back at the person again, but with much more evidence, much more persuasive information than you had before. And if that person, again, is intellectually honest with you, then it's possible that that person can be persuaded, or at least move from resistance to ambivalence. Now, the third one is the most difficult of all. It's called political. And that means that you're resisting me, or I'm resisting you, because I feel like I've got something I'm going to lose that's valuable to me. Size of my budget, my nice office, the head count of people the number of people that report to me, etc. So there's something I'm going to lose in this process because you're telling me that a part of this whole change effort is we're going to have to do some cutbacks. We're going to have to reduce a lot of our resources and so forth. So I'm probably going to lose some things that's valuable to me. So how do you deal with that? It's called negotiation, bartering, trade, language like that. So what I'm going to try to do in this particular case is to persuade you that if you go along for the short term and the long term, let me tell you what you're going to gain. So my selling job is longer term, but being honest in terms of the short term to say, yes, you may have to give up the size of budget for a while. But if what we're talking about in terms of making this change is successful, your budget will grow. It might take a year. Can you handle that? So it's negotiation, trading, bartering. So with respect to trying to bring about change, you've got to be as clear as you possibly can. And when you encounter resistance, what's the nature of it? Because if you don't do that right, you're not going to know how to deal with it properly. It's not always the same. And if you have people that are not resisting you, give them a hug.